Hey everyone, it's Mike from DestinyGuitar.com, and in this lesson I'm going to show you how to play the chord D over F sharp. Now just a note on slash chords and what they're called. You know, the right way to say this is D over F sharp. So when you're looking at D slash F sharp, you shouldn't necessarily say D slash F sharp because not very many people will know what you're talking about. And so if you don't want to necessarily sound like a beginner guitarist, then I would suggest if you're talking to your bandmates or to other people that you're playing with, you always say D over F sharp. Now there's a good reason why we say the word over. And it's because what these slash chords are doing is they're taking a standard major chord, or a minor chord, but a standard chord, and rather than having the chord rooted or started on the root note or the first note, the 1, which is in the case of, let's say, a D, you would have it rooted on the note D. You're rooting it, or you're putting it as the bottom note or the lowest note that you're playing, a different note. So in the case of a D over F sharp, rather than having just a standard D, which in this first position is a 4-string chord and starts on this D note right here, we're adding an F sharp to the bottom of the chord and instead rooting it there. So we're adding an F sharp on the bottom. Now I'm going to go to the close-up and show you exactly how to play this in its first position. But I just want to hopefully give you a little bit more information that will allow you to understand why these chords exist and really what they're doing there on your lead sheet or your chart. You know, the changeable bass note is essentially what that is. It's giving you a designation of what the bass player should be playing. So if you're looking at the chord designation and it says D slash F sharp, know that the chord that's being played is not the F sharp chord. In other words, you're not playing F sharp major. That's wrong. It's the designation on the left-hand side of the slash, okay, that is the chord that you're playing. So that's a D. So we are playing a D chord. You can substitute a D chord for a D over F sharp and allow other musicians in the band to take that bass note. Now if you're a bass player or a piano player, or you're a guitar player who's wanting to play that lower note or that bass note in your progression, know that what's on the right-hand side of the slash, or in this case the F sharp, is designating a note. It's not designating a chord. So on the left-hand side, D, that's your chord, slash, right-hand side, F sharp, that's your bass note. So the bass note's what's happening on the right-hand side of the slash. You know, I get that question a lot. You'd be surprised. You know, for those that are reading off of charts or lead sheets, you know, they may not have seen this kind of designation before. Also, people have come out of you know, rock bands or ensembles where they were playing without music. Many times the bass player or the piano player is walking down a chord progression, or they're adding a little bit of color or dynamics to the music by playing a different note, and the other musicians in the band are staying solid on a particular chord. So it wasn't necessarily charted out for them. They did it because it sounded good. So the bass player, let's say we're playing a D chord, we play D and we're getting ready to transition to, let's say, a G chord. The bass player might play a D and then walk up to that G chord by playing an F sharp first, and then when the chord change comes, he lands on a G with the rest of the band. If you were to write out that music or chart it out, it would be D slash F sharp right at that moment. Now if you're a guitar player and you're playing solo and you want to add a little bit of color to your chords or some interest is what we might call it, and you want to play the D over F sharp, well you can. And you're going to do it by doing something kind of cool, by wrapping your thumb around the back of the guitar and playing an F sharp that way. So let's go to the close-up and I'll show you exactly how to play it. Alright, so the way that we play this D over F sharp is to start first by playing or fretting out a standard D major chord in its first position. And the way you do that is you take your first finger and play the 2nd fret of the 3rd string, take your 3rd finger and play the 3rd fret of the 2nd string, and your 1st finger and play the 2nd fret of the 1st string. So this is your D major chord. Now, if you were just playing D, it'd be a 4-string chord. And to play D over F sharp, what you're doing, or what you're going to do, is take your thumb, if you can reach around and do it. Now, if your hands aren't big enough to reach around with your thumb and fret a note, don't be too concerned about it. You don't necessarily have to play the F sharp on the bottom while you're playing with the rest of the band, because you're not going to play anything that conflicts if the other instrumentalists are taking the F sharp on the bottom. But if you want to play the F sharp with them, what you'll do is take your thumb and wrap it around the neck right here at the 2nd fret of the 6th string, and you're going to play that note right there. What you're also going to want to do, and you don't necessarily have to do this because an A does exist in the D chord, but what you may want to do is mute this 5th string with, sort of this fleshy part of your thumb, so that it doesn't sound out. So you have the F sharp on the bottom right here, and then that note is muted. Then you have a D, A, D, F sharp. So F sharp, a muted string here. Next you have D, A, D, F sharp. Now you can play this A. It wouldn't necessarily conflict with the chord because an A note is in the chord. But I don't know, just for me, I think it sounds better if I don't play this A here. For some reason, I like it when you've just got that F sharp on the bottom, nice and strong. You skip a string and then you play the D here. And you can strum over all 6 strings when you play this D over F sharp. Now, as I said, you're typically playing this D over F sharp chord when you're going somewhere. In other words, you're about ready to transition to another chord. So in the example I gave earlier, if we had a D and we were walking it up to the G, or the rooted G in a G chord, we'd play D, D over F sharp to a G. You see how that works? Or let's say I'm taking a G and I'm walking it down, the bass note down, to an E minor. So if I started with a G here, and then rather than just playing a D, to the E minor, in which case my root notes on the guitar would be G to a D to an E minor. Instead, let's say I wanted to walk that down and go, then I would be playing a G, D over F sharp, to an E minor. That's a really good way to understand how that D over F sharp works in a chord progression. It's typically used to walk a bass line up or down, or emulate a walking bass line up and down the neck while you're doing chord changes. And really what you're doing is you're creating, and if you're a piano player and you're learning how to play the guitar, you'll understand this. What you're doing is you're creating an inversion of the chord. And so rather than having the chord rooted on a D, you're rooting it on a different note. You're rooting it on an F sharp. And so you've got a first inversion of a D major chord. And so really what you've done is you just kind of flip that chord upside down and you're playing one of the notes in it on the lower side. Alright, it makes a lot of sense to play this when you're transitioning in between chords, or you're walking down a melody line, or walking down a bass line into another chord. D over F sharp is not always a substitution chord for a D when it calls for a chord to be rooted on the D. But if it calls for a D over F sharp, now you know how to play it, and it's a very common chord in a lot of popular music today, so hopefully this helped you out. And if you want to know more about slash chords and more about how to play the guitar, check out some of our other lessons at destinyguitar.com.